Welcome back to another conversation with Chris. I'm here with Chad. Chad's an adventurer. He's done some multiple long distance adventures. He's gone coast to coast in Canada. He's gone from Jasper National Park up to the Arctic Ocean by canoe. And are you currently hiking the Appalachian Trail, or were you this summer?
I just got home 2 days ago from the Appalachian Trail. Yeah, I
Okay.
started down in Georgia and Amicalola Falls, and I made it all the way up to Harper's Ferry. But the last 3 weeks on trail, I kept re-injuring ankle injury and just kept retweaking it and retweaking it, and I had to make the tough call to get off trail and come home and try to heal it up so I could come back in a month and hopefully start heading south from Katahdin is the plan.
Okay. All right. And so so you're fresh back into the real world. Where do you live?
I live in London, Ontario.
Okay, all right. So still a populated area. Near
Yeah.
Toronto, right?
Yeah, about 2 hours
Nearish.
away from Toronto, nearish.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's further than I thought actually. Yeah, I was actually there once, just I think I feel like there's a train station there that I was just by the train station or something. Anyway,
Yeah.
um all right, so how does it feel to be back in kind of civilization after being on the trail for what were you on it for the last couple months or so?
Yeah, I was out there for about 3 months, just a little
Okay.
shy of 3 months, and yeah, it feels kind of weird, but it was really nice. Get to see all my nieces and nephews, brothers, sisters, and today is my second day home and my first day back at work. So that was definitely
Oh yeah.
kind of weird getting back into the swing of things with work and normal life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So you must be somewhat used to it. To be honest, I'm a bit more interested to hear about your cycling trip going coast to coast and your canoeing trip.
Yeah, of course.
When did you first get kind of interested in long distance travel, kind of this adventurous type of travel?
So it's kind of it's a story, the whole thing. I lost my big brother to he took his own life about 6 years ago,
Wow.
and after that happened, I was kind of just like kind of burying myself in a bottle, and yeah, wasn't looking very bright, and I it just kind of on one of my drunk benders the one night I remembered that I had made a crazy plan with my brother to do a coast to coast bike
Can I
trip.
stop you for just a second? Your audio just kind of changed. It's still
Oh no.
working, but okay, okay. Can I hear you again?
If I hold it
Okay,
closer to my face, is that better?
okay. Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
Okay, I'll hold it
Okay,
closer.
continue.
Um, but yeah, I remembered kind of just silly plans me and my brother made when we were younger. We were gonna ride our bikes across Canada, and the next day I kind of put down the bottle and started training for that. And a month later, I just kind of took off on my bike with not the most experience or anything. Kind of just learned and figured it out as I went. But yeah, I was able to fundraise just a little under $8,000 for Canadian Mental Health Association in memory of my brother, and that was pretty cool. And through that experience, I was able to meet like another guy that did that bike trip with me, who was facing a lot of the same kind of struggles that my big brother was facing at the time, and kind of reminded me a lot of my big brother, which was kind of a blessing in ways to be able to have a person like that on the trip with me. Became really good friends with him, and we met this crazy Australian guy. He foot traveled the South Americas for like the last 10 years, just traveling around with his kangaroo mask. He had his own travel page, called himself the Crazy Travel-roo. Real crazy guy, and yeah, he we met him on the bike trip, and he ended up calling me up the next spring, and he's like, hey, my German buddy just bailed on this canoe trip I had planned. Any chance you want to join me? And I asked a little bit of the details. He told me. I was like, I fucking hate my job right now. I went in next day and I quit. Got a plane ticket the next day, and we were canoeing 3 days later.
Wow, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah,
So tell me, let's start with the cycling trip. So you started where, in BC, or did you start on the East Coast?
I started out on East Coast.
Okay. So you got it. What did you fly out there? You got a bike and you just start pedaling, huh?
Yeah, yeah, pretty much, man. I really didn't have much of a clue of what I was getting
Yeah.
myself into, but you know, just luckily
And
I'm stubborn. I don't give up easy.
and what time of year was that? Spring?
That was early spring, yeah.
Okay. All right. So then how long before you kind of got into the swing of things and you felt like, okay, you're prepared? Because when you start, you probably didn't, maybe you didn't do much research, or I don't know, you probably didn't know
Yeah.
how conditioned you'd be or how far you'd go per day, but how long till you started feeling like comfortable and feeling like, okay,
Uh,
I got my setup going.
I was feeling a lot more comfortable with it come like Newfoundland to start off with. My God, those are probably some of the most intense, like straight up, straight down hills that I've
Okay.
ever experienced. So that was a rude awakening for the starting point for the trip. Uh, I'd say probably around Quebec is where I really like my legs were good.
Okay. And then what
Yeah,
about in terms of setup? Were you camping? Were you staying in?
I
There's
was
probably not so many
camping.
hostels along the way. I mean, you're not taking a traditional route like the Appalachian Trail is like established. You're just cruising, right? You're just
There were many nights where I was kind of just looking for a place that I thought I could get away with stealth camping, illegally camping
okay.
in different towns, and but yeah, I mostly stayed. I had my hammock with me and I had my tent with me. I mainly stayed
Okay.
in those two.
Okay. And did you have much of a setup? Did you have like those panniers or whatever, those bags on the side of the
Oh
car, or are
no,
you
no,
just in like
not
a
at all. I had
backpack?
no idea what those even were.
Okay. So were you just in a backpack or what?
So the bike that I used, it was actually like a racing bike. It's not really
Okay.
made for hauling gear long distances, but
Uh-huh.
I did a few tweaks to it on my Cannondale racer bike. Did a few tweaks on it so I could put a back rack on it, and I just kind of stacked everything on that back rack. So it wasn't the most sturdy or stable bike by
Yeah.
any means, especially like going down some of those big hills. The speed that you got with all that weight on the back, like I had a couple pretty dangerous speed wobbles, but no wipeouts, luckily.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you survived. Um, so on that trip, like how long did it take you to get from coast to coast? How many miles or kilometers is that?
That's like oh, I'd have it's been a good 6 years now. It was over 7,000 kilometers.
Okay.
Yeah. And it took me yeah, it took me 6 months.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. I
And
like for
sorry.
somebody who hasn't had experience, that's plenty fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what were some of the highlights of that trip?
Uh Honestly, there are so many amazing people that I met along the way, and just being able to like share my brother's story
Mm-hmm.
with like different people and different communities, and finding out about different like mental health struggles and issues that are across the entire country. Like each and every place along the country, each city, they all have their own kind of special, unique kind of struggles with mental health and addiction going on there, and they
Uh-huh.
all have their own different kind of ways of dealing with it or sweeping it under the rug. And it was really interesting for me to be able to go across coast to coast across Canada and see how vastly different we handle situations and stuff like that.
Yeah. And I imagine you were mostly cycling around the southern border.
Yeah, I took it was the Trans Canada. There's two Trans Canada highways, Highway 1 and Highway
Or
16.
okay.
I took the Trans Canada Highway 1 most of the way.
Okay, so that's what I mean, that's getting major like truck traffic and everything, right?
Yeah, fairly. Like there's when you get near the big cities,
Yeah.
mostly. Yeah.
But
And
is there were you able to ride like alongside of the road? Was there any kind of bike paths? Was there
there was no
yeah,
bike path at all. There was maybe a half of a foot of a white line and
yeah,
then a white line, a half foot, and then gravel. And
gravel, yeah, and then
the
gravel
trucks
probably
are
going
coming up.
downhill.
Yeah. So whenever trucks are going by, I basically just tried my hardest to hug that shoulder and not hit any gravel because that would be, yeah.
Yeah,
Got my
okay.
heart going pretty good a couple of times there, I tell you.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Um, so tell me about like when you got to the end of that, what are some of the changes you felt in yourself? Like how did you feel? Like also in terms of mindset, mindset at the end of the adventure compared to the beginning.
So, like I had mentioned, like this was a really big kind of the bike trip was a big adventure for me to kind of be able to come to terms with what had happened with my big brother and be able to let go of that and kind of move on. And going across the whole country, I carried some of his ashes with me across well for all my trips. And whenever there's like a really beautiful kind of spot, I'd spread a little bit of him in whatever area I was having that moment. And I just say like through the trip, it allowed me to be able to let go and be able to carry on with my life with, you know, get rid of some of the grief that I was holding pretty deeply onto.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And you touched on like a lot of the people you met along the way. I'm sure that helps.
Yeah.
You meet
I
interesting
swear
people.
I
Yeah.
can I can travel across Canada coast to coast anytime from now for the rest of my life. And I feel like at least once every 100 to 200 kilometers, I have somebody I can stop in and
Yeah.
they put me up for the night if I'm just traveling through,
Yeah.
it's really cool to make the connections that you make when you do these kinds of travels and the people that you meet.
Yeah. And did
Yeah.
you meet a lot of people just by like you're riding your bike and people are like kind of yelling to you out the window or asking you what you're doing or
Yeah.
mostly when you get to town?
It's a lot of when you get to town or like stop at a gas station or variety store or like a picnic area along the highway, any scenic area. There's always people that'll stop and like, hey, what are you doing? That's quite the pack you
Yeah.
got there. Yeah,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
yeah,
All right. Um, so you finished this trip, you ended up somewhere in BC, I assume somewhere around Vancouver or
yeah,
something.
yeah. We took the ferry across and did a little loop around Vancouver Island to
All
finish
right.
off.
All
Yeah,
right, nice. Cool.
yeah.
And then from that, did you kind of go back to working and the real world like normal life?
I I had such a hard time like getting back into the swing of real like that was my first big trip like away
Yeah,
from all of that stuff for a long
yeah,
time. So like coming back home, I felt very off from what was like my
yeah,
normal day to day,
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Like getting back to work, like I had a hard time even like let alone like I could get a job, but like just wanting to hold it for the first like, few months, I was just like, man, what the fuck is this? Like,
yeah.
I want to be back on the road.
When you've had experience like that, when you've had so much freedom, and during that experience, you're depending much less on money than you were in the normal world, right? Because
Yeah,
what you learn that you need like the basics for survival. You need food, water, clothing, shelter, and some good people around. That can give you a good life. And then you go back to the real world and you're working, probably doing something you don't necessarily enjoy
yeah,
and getting different energy from people as well.
yeah. I feel like, yeah, when I first came home from that trip, I just felt like everybody was so miserable and like
Yeah.
self-centered, and it really
Yes.
like it really took me back a little bit. I was just like, what
Yeah.
is this what it was always like, or am I just different now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my thought, if I can relate it, like you also had a lot of time by yourself to get to know yourself when you're on that trip, right? And maybe you learned how to like read people's energy, and you probably changed as a person. But when you get back, you can kind of read those things in people, which you weren't detached from that before at all. But you had these 6 months to detach from that and
Mm-hmm.
be by yourself, get to know yourself, and then things
That's
become much
exactly
more
it.
clear after you've had that separation.
Yeah. I yeah. I had something there I just lost.
That's all
So
right.
I had some, uh
All right. So then you met a crazy Aussie walking around. He was just walking at the
yeah.
time.
The crazy travel route. He was riding his bike across country too.
Okay.
Just randomly woke up the one day and his tent was set up same area we had our tent set up, and chatted with him a little bit, and he was riding like the oldest biggest like piece of junk bike that you should
Yeah.
never attempt to ride across
Okay.
country. He
Yeah.
was riding it, and we ended up riding with him for like maybe 6 days after that, and his bike ended up breaking on him, like the whole
Okay.
front wheel and like handlebars, everything just snapped right off as he was
Wow.
going. So, and he was kind of short on cash for that, and me and my buddy, we were able to, through like one of the schools we were talking with about like the mental health awareness, drug addiction awareness. We were chatting with them, and one of the schools actually ended up setting us up with a bike to hook him up with so that he could keep going,
All right.
like on our last days going, which was pretty, it was pretty cool. And then we ended up going our separate ways. He went up, he was going to the Yukon, and we were going to the
Oh man.
southern Vancouver Island.
Yeah.
And he ended up going all the way up to Edmonton, and we were in
Yeah.
Calgary. But he ended up missing us so much that he brought his bicycle another extra 200 kilometers all the way down to Calgary to ride with us a little bit further.
Wow. All
We ended
right.
up riding all the way up to Jasper, which I've worked up there before in the past, and introduced him to a bunch of my friends up there. And he ended up actually meeting his baby mom and his wife up there on that trip.
Wow. All
Yeah,
right.
crazy how people's paths cross and can
Yeah.
be so influential like that on your life and journey.
So that must have been so random even meeting him. Like how many people are how how often did you cross paths with people that were cycling across the country? Probably not
I'd
often.
probably I'd probably see a couple every day, to be honest.
Oh, really? So this is
Yeah.
at least this is somewhat common of a thing.
Yep. I mean, it's not
Okay.
nowhere near as
Not
common as like hiking the Appalachian
yeah, yeah,
Trail.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's
Yeah.
something you read about. Yeah, okay. And had you heard about doing this before you decided to do it or read about it or
No,
something? No,
no,
okay.
it was just,
Yeah,
hey,
just
this sounds
something.
crazy. Let's do it.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So multiple people per day you'd meet. That's kind of nice because then you have some people to interact with that are doing the same thing that can relate to you, right?
The thing is, he's the only person that I ran into out of all the people that I met up with doing the same thing. He's the only person that I met up with that we ended up like consistently like doing the
Okay. Yeah.
same kind of kilometers every day and sticking together.
Okay.
Because I mean, there's no set camp spots or anything like along the Appalachian Trail. So like, if yeah, everybody
Yeah.
could have a different place to sleep for the night, and
Yeah.
you're never gonna see him again.
Yeah, okay. So you have kind of a bond with this guy. You travel with him for a bit, and then a couple years later, or so he calls you and says, "Hey, you want to do this canoe trip?"
Yep,
All right. And
man.
so tell me a bit about that. You said 2,200 kilometers from Jasper up to the Arctic Ocean.
Yes. So it wasn't all canoeing. So we built this hitch system where we brought our bicycles with us on the trip.
All
And
right.
we built this hitch system where we could attach the canoe to two wheels and hook it onto our bike seat and swivel it on that. So whenever the rivers ended up getting like too intense, we would make a decision and either stay on or hop off and pedal to a different river, and which
Okay.
ended up being for the best because the Athabasca River that flows through Jasper, the usually it takes about 2 months for all the snow, the flood waters from the mountains, all the snow to melt and end up in the river system. And that year it happened in a 2 week period. And
Wow.
that right when we were starting. So the water was super high and super fast.
Yeah.
Yeah. After the first day, our nerves were shot. Second day, we ended up hopping on our bikes, doing a doing the bike road thing, and we ended up doing a wrong turn onto a back logging road. And I don't know if you've ever driven down a back country logging road, but it's not ideal for towing a 200-pound canoe on
Yeah.
a
Yeah, I
heavy bike.
imagine.
So we made it like 70 kilometers down that, and it was another 70 kilometers. So we would hit a paved road we found out from a trucker going down. We found the river again, ended up hopping back on river. And yeah, we handled the rapids and the fast water pretty good the second day on river. But right near the end of the day, there was this grizzly bear made eye contact with us and just started coming beelining through these rapids straight for us with ease. And
Wow.
we were so just flabbergasted at the fact that
Yeah.
this thing is going through these gnarly waters like it's nothing. We
And he
turned
was
our
coming
heads.
at you.
Yeah, he was like looking at us like eye
Okay.
contact. It was
Okay.
freaky. So we got distracted for maybe like a total of 30, 60 seconds looking at this thing. By the time we look forward, we're getting sucked into a log jam on an island.
Damn.
Canoe gets sucked in, and we both try to jump up on top of the log jam. I jumped up, but I slipped back under, and my leg got pinned beneath, in between the canoe and the log jam. And the canoe, the further
Jesus.
it got sucked under the log jam, the further I got sucked under, and I just kept getting sucked further and further, getting pinned between this canoe and the log jam. And luckily, my buddy was just able to grab the log and with his feet just pry the canoe down just enough that I could get out. And by the time that he did that and I got out on top, the whole canoe starts just rolling, rumbling underneath this log jam. You can feel it. So I just start running to the end of the log jam fast as I could, and I was just able to jump into into the water. I was just able to grab onto the log, and I was just able with my other hand to grab on to the rope that was attached to the canoe, and I was able to pull it in just enough to tie it off on the log jam so that we didn't lose all our shit and the trip wasn't over day 3 of the trip.
Yeah, so this is day 3.
Yeah, day 3, almost finished her. And I tell you what, I like that was fresh snow melt water, so that was like freezing, frigidly cold, and
Yeah.
how fast it was moving. All of our gear was completely soaked, and it was this was like sunset time. Sun was going down,
Oh
so
wow.
we had all
Yeah.
our shit. And even though we had it all double bagged in water, like sea to summit, like a water covered packs,
Yeah.
even with all that, everything got soaked, all our sleeping bags, everything. So we just had to kick into like, okay, this is go mode. Like we need to.
Yeah.
What are we doing? Building a fire. Grabbed our machetes,
Yeah.
chopped down all the bush we could around us, and found what we could, and just built a fire to try to keep warm.
Yeah. Yeah, that's survival mode.
Oh yeah, that was the most scared I had ever been at that point in my life, like
Yeah,
leading
at
up.
that point, okay. I'm interested to hear the further points where you were the most scared.
Yeah, no
Um,
more happened on that trip.
yeah, yeah. So that's day 3. And
Yeah.
then walk us through some of the other like notable points on that. First of all, how long did that take to get from Jasper to the Arctic Ocean?
Uh, Jasper up to the Arctic Ocean. I'd say it took us about 2.5 to 3 months.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
And so what are some of the more memorable like also periods or stories along the way?
Uh, well, So yeah, ended up meeting a whole lot of people when we were going between river systems, towing the canoe with our bicycles. We ended
Uh-huh.
up turning a lot of heads doing that. Actually, got like people would just be pulling over and chatting with us for like a half hour. Just like, what the hell are you guys doing?
Yeah.
We've never seen nothing like this before.
Yeah.
And then yeah, we got the attention of CBC News. They ended up getting a hold of us and doing a couple articles along the trip as we went. Yeah, we ended up saving a man's life, and
How did that happen? Was that in the water or?
yeah, that was on the water. That's actually that's the other time that it starts with another story where I almost died.
All right.
Yeah, so it was Canada Day, and there's only 9 villages along the Mackenzie River. That's like the second largest river in all of North America. There's
Uh-huh.
only 9 villages along it, and only 2 of them serve alcohol. And on
Okay.
Canada Day,
And it's Canada Day.
on Canada Day, I was just like, my Australian friend, he didn't understand, but I was just like, man, I'm having a fucking beer today, okay?
Yeah.
Like, you're not gonna stop me. He's like, well, that's like 75 kilometers of canoeing. I'm just like, I don't care. We're doing it. So we ended up canoeing 75 kilometers to get to Fort Simpson. And going into Fort Simpson, like we didn't have any service or anything. All we knew is what we had from our river guides, which told us there's 2 massive forks of 2 rivers, the Mackenzie River and the Liard River. And then on the other side of the Liard River is Fort Simpson. Also, our guidebook said when there's a massive cliff at the fork of the 2 rivers, once you get to the Liard, turn up it and follow up the side of the river to wherever you find the ferry. Well, what we didn't know because we were out in the middle of nowhere and didn't have service or anything is that the ferry there had been shut down for the first time in the 75 years of it running because of massive rainfall and
Wow.
landslides
Yeah.
in the river. So, but and it's a massive cliff, like fork of 2 rivers. One river's coming this way, others going this way, and a big cliff in the middle.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
by the time we get out there to try to turn up, we look around the corner and there are trees the size of like SUVs just beelining, shooting out at us and like fast water. So like that's the first thing we see when we go out into that. And by the time we get out and see that, there's no turning back. Like you need to go. So we weren't able to go up the way to the ferry because the current was too strong and there were trees. And there was also right around when that happened and we started going forward, we were going sideways over like probably I'd say close to meter high waves. So trying to balance a canoe that's like this far from its flood line, maxed out with gear, going over meter high waves sideways, trying to balance while also dodging SUV sized trees that are shooting out at you. And if you look out to your right, where the 2 currents of the rivers actually meet, it's just like ferocious white water. Just like all you can hear is just the intense sound of water. And looking out at it, you're like, if I get sucked out into that, I'm screwed.
Yeah.
So we just buckle down and we're paddling our absolute hardest, trying to go sideways across the Liard and not get sucked out where the Liard and the Mackenzie meet. And yeah, oh man, I had never been so that is the most afraid I've been in my entire life. Like my heart was pounding so hard out of my chest. That's all that I could hear. It was a mixture of that and the rapid waves that were rivers trying to suck us into. And as we get like halfway across this, doesn't a big ass storm kicks up with a strong northern wind blowing against those 2 river currents. So those meter high waves that we were going sideways over turned into 2 meter high waves.
Wow.
My yeah, like I'm shaky right now just talking about it. Oh, so we ended up getting across the river. It took us like 2.5 hours of just absolute all out paddling our hardest and trying not to have a heart attack. By the time we got to the other side, it was like another half kilometer down to get to the actual boat launch, or a straight like half a kilometer cliff straight up to the village. And we weren't getting back on the water. We did like, well, no, we got out of the river. We just looked at each other and hugged each other. And I was just like, man, I fucking love you. I can't believe we made it through that. And then we
Yeah.
both just collapsed in the mud and like passed out for an hour or two, like
Wow.
completely KO'd, overwhelmed from the experience. Then we carried all of our gear up into the village, did like 5 trips up this mountain or cliff. And yeah, once we got there, we went in and grabbed some beer for Canada Day.
Yeah.
The only bummer is when we got back to our gear, somebody in the village had stolen the 3 months worth of dry good that we had,
Oh
which
man.
back home cost $300 to supply. And then up there, everything cost 3 times as much. So
Yeah.
it ended up costing $900 to resupply all that. It was a really bitter pill to swallow at that point. But there was this one super nice guy in the village, Alan. He brought us a case of beer, a 10-pound pike he caught that day, and a bunch of fruits and veggies from his garden. And he offered to drive us around the next day to look around and tell us any leads of people that he suspected might have something to do or might know something about it. So we ended up sticking around an extra day to hang out with Alan and have him try to help us with that, to no avail. And left the next day. Just did a short trip down the river because it was a kind of emotionally frustrating experience for us. We wanted to unwind from. So we spent
Yeah.
half the day just fishing. The next morning, I wake up to these faint cries across this like 2.5 kilometer wide river. I hear these faint cries, help, help, I'm hurt, I need help. And they kept like fading in and out. And I was like, man, that like I'm hearing some kind of crazy ass bird or something. Then it got to a point, it's just like, no, this is like somebody's hurt and needs help. I wake my buddy up, and by the time he hears it, we were both up. We emptied out the canoe, grabbed our SOS GPS Garmin GPS tracker, and I grabbed my machete because I also had a thought in my head like, what if it's somebody just trying to fricking like bait us in and steal our
Yeah.
shit or something? So I prepared for that possibility. We started going across the river. It took us like an hour and a half, 2 hours to cross. By the time we got there, I see like this boat, and we're getting closer to it, and the head keeps kind of popping up, calling for help, and then fading, falling back down. And then when we got close enough, you know who was in that boat? The guy Alan that had helped us out the day before.
No way.
Yes way. He had gotten stabbed in the leg by somebody and tried getting away from him by hopping in his boat, and his engine wouldn't start. So he just floated down the river, bleeding out of his leg all night long and just fading in and out of consciousness in the Arctic.
Wow.
And on that river, like if we hadn't caught him at that point, he could have been floating down that river solo for like 3 days.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just for how angry and pissed off I was at the fact that somebody would steal my food. Without that experience happening, I came to the
Yeah.
conclusion without that experience happening, we wouldn't have stayed an extra day, and we wouldn't have been able to meet this guy, and we wouldn't have been able to be in the right spot at the right time to help this guy when he needed us the most.
Wow, that is an incredible story.
Yeah,
Holy
man.
like the odds are incredible.
Yeah, it's pretty
Wow.
great, pretty wild, man.
So
Yeah.
he's just randomly stabbed and then like any
So
idea what that was
there's
over?
okay, so there's like some I'm telling you the story that he told me, but there's like definitely some questionable things in his story.
Okay.
Like I'm just telling you what he told me, but from what I so apparently he was fishing with a guy and his girlfriend, and the guy attacked him because he thought he was hitting on his girlfriend, which seems like okay, like maybe it's just somebody overreacting. But the strange thing is, my friend Alan, he wasn't wearing any pants.
Okay.
So like by the time we
Yeah.
got over to him, like I ended up giving him my pants, and my buddy
Yeah.
gave him his sweater. And by the time the RCMP shows up, I'm just standing there with my hand on my junk, just like, hey,
Yeah.
what's
Yeah.
up, guys? But yeah,
All
I'm
right.
not sure what exactly
Yeah.
happened with that story. I
Yeah.
that that's just what Alan told me on his behalf.
Yeah. Okay. Um, all right, Chad. I hate, I hate to wrap it up, but I've only got one more minute of recording.
Oh no.
So hold on, hold on.